URC Power Rankings, folks, for the final regular season round of the competition. As you can see, I'm on the floor back in New Zealand in about 10 days or so, which will be happily prior to the URC knockout round. So, yeah, very much looking forward to the 4 quarterfinals that are on the cards, but let's wrap the regular season up with some power rankings, and you guys can let us know your thoughts. I should say, because a couple of people seem to get confused by this last week, power rankings aren't just like reading out what is the URC table. It's an attempt to kind of see which teams are in kind of better runs of form by looking at more weight on recent results and more weight for kind of away wins, and more weight for kind of big wins, and more weight for winning over strong teams than weak teams. That's the idea. Doesn't always work out to my own satisfaction, but anyway, it is what it is. Sadly, Zebre couldn't finish the season with a win. They lost to the Lions 50 points to 35. They did once again score some pretty nice tries. JC scored a hat-trick of tries. They've played some fun rugby this year, just not the most winningest of kinds. The start of the season certainly started pretty optimistically, and I feel like they're gonna have some learnings from this year's competition, but learning how to win was not among them just yet. So that one's in the bag, and can quickly go back, I guess, into the dustbin of history for the Zebre boys. But as I said, fingers crossed, in terms of experience, they'll be better off for it. But yeah, 15th is still the Dragons. So same spot for them, same as Zebre. No change for last week, although they did get a win. Remember, the Welsh teams played at the Principality. They had kind of the Judgment Day thing, and that seemed to work pretty well for the Dragons, man. They got a win over the Scarlets. And remember, the Scarlets, although they've finished pretty poorly on the table, actually had a decent kind of last third of the season. So the Scarlets haven't kind of been a rubbish team, although they were pretty bad at the start. They were getting things right, but I mean, Dyer seemed to have a bit of a cracker, some good gas and some kind of good steps from that man. So yeah, 31 points to 14 winners. They still finish the season with a pretty bad record, and they still finish in the season in 15th spot, which is the equivalent of where my power rankings are as well. But yeah, they finish with a win. Finishing with a win is not something Edinburgh was able to do. They went to Ulster, and Ulster lost. They lost to Ulster. Remember, Ulster had the kind of added pressure of competing for that second spot on the log. So it was always going to be a tough one, although it's great to see Darcy Graham back. Yeah, man. A couple of weeks in a row. His difference is just, I mean, the guy is just next level. It's real X factor. So you can't just one for one replace that kind of guy when he's out. So they're another team who will be looking to finish better next year. They did finish 12th on the table, which is better than I've got them on the power rankings. Remember, the tail end of Edinburgh season was kind of bad, so that's kind of reflected here. 13th, I've got the Ospreys, who also kind of finished with a pretty bad record, and they lost their game to Cardiff 38 points to 21. I mean, they were down like 20 plus points at half time, so they gave themselves a bit of a mission. They did get a wee bit of a comeback going on. I mean, they scored 20-odd points of their own, but still, if you're going to give yourself that much of a catch-up job to do, unless you're a pretty good team, you're more likely than not going to lose the game. So sadly for the Ospreys, they're not the kind of team who can chuck a 20-odd lead and then be able to kind of easily run it down. So yeah, it is a loss for them. Benetton got them in 12th. They finished the season with their kind of tour of South Africa, which was maybe a bit of a tricky one for them. They lost to the Stormers, obviously reigning champions and one of the kind of higher ranked sides in the URC this season. They lost 38-22, which is by no means disgraceful, and they scored an absolutely gorgeous try. Like, that's one of the few games, because thank you to Michael for the tip on watching some of the URC. I had a bit of a struggle with that last week, but I managed to watch 2 of the games, which, as I'm sitting here on holiday, is more than I did last week. So that try, Gajo to, was it Ezekor? Oh my goodness, what a try. If you haven't seen that one, it's well worth going to watch the highlights. But I should say the highlights of the URC, the ones they put on their official channel, are absolutely hot garbage. I swear they make those highlights packages that bad just to make you watch the full games, because yeah, they're both not timely in their upload, very short, often missing key points, and just seemingly kind of edited by someone who rolled out of bed in the morning and just kind of, chuck something together, man. Like, it doesn't, the highlights are not great, but that try was sweet. So there you go. Benetton, I've got them in 12th. They finished 11th on the log, so not too much difference. The Scarlets, like I mentioned, had a decent end to the season, although their final game was a pretty disappointing loss to the Dragons. I mean, Challenge Cup, they're doing all right. And then, they had like a few wins on the bounce just a few weeks ago, kind of in the URC, but it's a bit of a damp squib of an end for their season. So, another side who had a big deficit to come back from and failed to do so. So, 21 down, they finished 31, 14 losers in that game. So that's one where they finished genuinely much lower on the actual log than I had them in the power rankings, but mainly because their second half of the season was better than the first. So their recent form is certainly better than the way they started. Another Welsh team resumes, and here's Cardiff. Remember, none of the Welsh teams sadly made the knockout stages of the URC, but Cardiff at least finished that kind of judgment day with a win, despite the fact that they've got some off-field dramas going on. And I mean, they actually finished with a 9-9 record, so they won half their games. I know the Welsh teams finishing a bit lower, they get to play the Welsh teams a bit more. That's probably a factor in it as well. But I mean the Scottish teams got to play Benetton and Zebre. Zebre didn't win any games, so each conference has certainly got its kind of strengths and weaknesses. But Cardiff finished with 9-9, so I don't want to be a kind of big old downer on the Welsh sides. Like, that's a dead even record. That's 500. All right, that's dead even. So and another season that might have been enough to qualify for the playoffs, but. And Super Rugby, that certainly would have been enough to qualify for the playoffs, but not in the URC. What can you say about Cardiff, man? They scored some bloody good tries. I would have liked to have seen more of them, but I only saw the highlights for that one. And as I said, URC highlights decides to just leave random tries out of the highlights packages for some reason. So there you go. They scored a couple of early tries and managed to see the game out. So well done to Cardiff, even if their season is done. 9th, I've got the old Sharks. Sharks finished with a draw against Munster. They scored like 3 first half tries and seemed to have this game going in the right direction, and yet they managed to get kind of run down by the Munster guys. Now, I didn't see that game in full. I only caught up on kind of bits and pieces in it, but the Sharks just seem to be a little bit kind of underperforming when you see some of the big names they've got on that roster. So I know there's been off-the-field stuff with the Sharks as well, but we will see, though, because they've got Leinster in the quarterfinals, and you might think, geez, Leinster finished with a pretty bloody good record. Going away to Leinster might be tough. Remember, Leinster's got a game in the Champions Cup this coming weekend, whereas the Sharks, not so much. So the Sharks can absolutely put all the focus on this, hopefully get the travel and stuff sorted out of the way early. And you never know, man. The Sharks are that kind of side that right now, any result, like them getting thumped or them putting in kind of a sneaky win, you could honestly see it going either way. But there you go. Mbonambi got a try. I think they got one through Notcher. So there you go. The Sharks, they finished 8th on the log, which is good enough for the quarterfinals. 9th in my power ranking, so not much in it. The Bulls, speaking of Leinster, the Bulls handed Leinster their first regular season loss of the season, and boy, did they do it in emphatic fashion. 62 points to 7. Now, admittedly, we need to remember this is not Leinster's first or potentially even second strength side, but damn, man, but the Leinster side got a win last week over the Lions. So the fact that Bulls did a 62-7 job on them is still pretty emphatic and worthy of some praise, man. Aronson, Moody, like Papier, these guys, like the 4-pack just generally was just monstrous. So fingers crossed for the Bulls, they've kind of turned stuff around at the right time, because I've got them relatively low on the power rankings for a side that finished, I think, 6th. But remember, their latter half to the season was, pretty patchy at best. So there you go. The Bulls they have got the Stormers away from home in an All-South African derby for their quarterfinal in a couple of weeks. Above the Bulls, I've actually got the Lions, believe it or not, in the power rankings terms. Remember, the Lions didn't make the playoffs, but they did have a better end to the season than the start. Some sides didn't kind of manage to overcome that deficit. They kind of had to, chase down for a playoff spot. So that's the Lions season, but certainly some optimism, I think, about the Lions. Like Nohamba's playing well since he's gone to Joburg, which I've mentioned numerous times. Van der Merwe is looking good on the wing. Creel got a nice try, even though he's kind of at a different end of his career. But, yeah, man, 50 points to 35 over the Zebre boys. Nice way, even if it was at Loftus, to finish out the season for the boys from Joburg. Sixth spot, I've got Connacht. Remember, all 4 Irish teams made the playoffs, but for Connacht, their final round was a loss, sadly for them, but against a side in Glasgow who's been playing some pretty bloody good rugby. So 29-27, that's almost like a knockout game in itself, right? That's a proper arm wrestle of a game. Their scrum got a good penalty try pretty early on, which is encouraging for them. They got a late try on to kind of make it a close one, but yeah, very, very close game. Couldn't quite get the job done against a very good Glasgow side. So Connacht, man, another side who's totally focused on the URC. Actually, I can't remember the Challenge Cup quarterfinalists, but anyway, Connacht, they would love to win the URC. Let's just put it that way. Fifth, I've got the Stormers. Reigning champions, like I mentioned, they play at Stellenbosch, and I watched this game. Fortunately, it was good to see Evan Roos back, even if he got a bloody a yellow card. But I mean, they won 38-22 over Benetton. Benetton did enough to kind of make them work for it, which was pleasing in terms of me sitting there as a neutral watching the game. But the Stormers, I mean, they look pretty good. They scored some nice ones, and I mean, Willemse, his hands at times are just absolutely, just highlight-worthy level stuff, even if maybe the URC highlights package people don't always include that kind of stuff. But man, 38-22. They finished third on the logs. The power rankings have got them slight lower. They're another side that's been a little bit, I kind of want to say, sketchy towards the latter stage of the season. But they got the Bulls next up, which is going to be a heck of a clash in a couple of weeks. Fourth, I've got the Munster boys. They got a draw away to the Sharks, 22 points apiece. They were 19-3 down at one point, the Munster guys, and they were looking, as I said, kind of dead and buried. Calvin Nash got a great, if a little bit kind of fluky one, where he was, you got to chase your kicks, and he managed to chase and kind of dink it through and regather it when the Sharks defenders maybe should have done a bit better with it. But yeah, he chased it for a reason. Now they finished fifth on the rankings, so the actual table. So they have got an away trip to Glasgow coming up. So fourth on the power rankings, but one spot lower on the actual table means they don't have that kind of much needed home fixture. But anyway, another side, if I'm sounding like a broken record, who certainly finished better the second half of the season, because they also started looking kind of rather poor at the start. Third spot, I've got the Ulster guys, who were mainly, I think, focused on making sure they put themselves in the best position to finish actually second on the table in their game against Edinburgh, and they did it. Like, they went down early, but they managed to come back and win that game, and they secured that second spot on the table just barely. So they finished on the same points total as the Stormers, but enough for second spot on the table, which means they host Connacht in an all-Irish derby. So you got one all-Irish derby in Connacht and Ulster, and one all-South African derby. Then there's kind of a couple of inter-conference ones, I guess you'd call them, and the other two quarterfinals. But man, that's going to be very, very tasty. So Ulster, I'm pretty sure they are absolutely focused on the URC. So while other teams are distracted, maybe Leinster, Ulster, this is your year, surely time to kind of let that potential get some trophy. Anyway, second, Glasgow. Been talking them up, man. Much better weather this week seemingly than last week. Hugh Jones got a very, very early try, and they put themselves in a pretty good position, but they had to hang on. They had to hang on at the death, but they only finished fourth, Glasgow, which means, remember, they still get to host a quarterfinal. which is all important in the scheme of things, with home teams winning as often as they do. It's not guaranteeing anything, but another team who's, I reckon, finished the season pretty bloody impressively. So possible contender, but still, even though they lost, Leinster's record has kind of proved unassailable in the power rankings. Now, they have had a little bit of a kind of dip. Like, the gap in the power rankings is absolutely, like, if Leinster were miles ahead of everyone for a while, but the gap has certainly tailed off with Leinster getting a draw and a loss in recent weeks, but their record of 16-1-1, whereas the next best team, I think, had 13 wins, is still enough to keep them as your top dog in the power rankings for that final win. They got an absolute hiding from the Bulls, 62 points to 7. They scored their first points on 53 minutes when they were already like 48 points down. So, yeah, but that's not the Leinster team that's going to take the field this week in the Champions Cup, and nor is that the team that's going to take the field in a fortnight against the Sharks boys. So, yeah, there you go, folks. Power rankings for the URC for the final regular season round. That'll be the final power rankings we do from the floor of my in-laws' house, which is not my normal spot. I would have done it in the lounge, but they've got a little fish tank which has a kind of trickling water sound in the background, and I was worried about sending you guys all to the bathroom with the kind of trickling sound of water in the bathroom, in the background, making you think of needing to go to the toilet, basically. So there you go, power rankings for the final time for the URC. By the time we get the quarterfinals, I'll be back in NZ. I'll be watching the games, hopefully live, or if not, like delayed without spoilers. Looking forward to it, folks. You guys let us know your thoughts. Do you reckon it's Leinster who's your top favourite, or do you see someone else maybe pipping them to the URC with Leinster's eyes kind of maybe more firmly fixed on the Champions Cup at the minute? You guys let us know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.